What if I told you the reason your evening bus route just got canceled is because a fake picture of a $9 million gold fountain went viral on social media?
Yeah, it sounds completely absurd.
Right. It sounds as a joke.
Yeah.
But that kind of localized chaos it's happening everywhere, every day.
Hmm.
We usually treat the daily news like this barrage of random, isolated crises.
Mm-hmm.
High prices at the grocery store, canceled local services, massive anxiety over AI legislation. But what if those aren't separate stories at all?
Well, they're not. They share the exact same underlying architecture. I mean,
Yeah.
every single one of those headlines is ultimately asking the same fundamental question. When resources, like time, money, land, attention, when those are inherently scarce, who actually gets to decide how they're allocated?
Which brings us to the mission for this deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
We are tearing into excerpts from a new book that just dropped August 22, 2026, called Politics and Economics Relearned. The subtitle is A Practical Guide to Power, Markets, Money, and the Choices That Shape Everyday Life.
Yeah.
And we're digging through the main text, the practical appendices, and there's this brilliant illustrative short story included in the book called The Ledger on Maple Street.
Yeah, that story is great. The author is essentially attempting to hand us the causal map of shared life.
Right.
Instead of treating civics and economics as, abstract theory or just vocabulary words to memorize, the book forces this set of intensely practical questions onto every headline you read. Like, who has the authority to act? What limits that authority? Who benefits? And crucially, who pays?
Okay, let's unpack this, and I think we should start where it hurts the most, which is the wallet.
Oh, absolutely. Always the wallet.
Yeah. So the book anchors its microeconomic analysis in that short story you mentioned about a woman named Maya.
Right.
She manages a bakery called Juniper and Grain on Maple Street.
Yeah.
And she is staring down this just brutal Tuesday morning ledger. I mean, flour's up 8%.
Yeah.
Butter is up an agonizing 14%. Even the little paper sleeves for the pastries are up like 6 cents a unit.
Mm-hmm.
And her supplier just slapped a new delivery surcharge on top of all of it.
Which is forcing her to wipe the chalkboard and change the price of a cardamom roll from $4.25 to $4.50.
And the immediate instinct, for the customer walking into Juniper and Grain is to look for a villain.
Always.
Right. We want a simple narrative. We see a $4.50 pastry and immediately we just scream, corporate greed.
Yes.
We assume the bakery is just price gouging to pad their margins.
And the book pushes back on that narrative really aggressively. It reframes prices not as arbitrary decisions made by greedy people, but as signals of scarcity.
Okay, explain that.
So that 14% jump in butter that Maya is paying, that isn't just one greedy dairy farmer.
Wow.
It's a cascading signal of decentralized coordination. It reflects a spike in the cost of feed for the cattle, increased energy costs to run the refrigeration, regional transport bottlenecks, maybe a labor shortage at the processor.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. The price is just the final dashboard indicator that butter is simply harder to get.
But I want to challenge that macroeconomic perspective for a second, though.
Sure.
Because I'm looking at the book's own data card, timestamped August 22, 2026. The official headline, CPI, the Consumer Price Index, in the U.S. is sitting at 3.4% year over year.
Mm-hmm.
The U.K. is at 2.9%. Japan is 1.9%. So if the broad inflationary environment is supposedly cooling down to the low single digits, why does Maya's ledger feel like it's on fire?
It's a great question.
Because that discrepancy between a 3.4% CPI and the 14% butter hike, that makes people feel like the government is just gaslighting them with fake averages.
Right, and the frustration there is entirely valid. The book actually addresses this by distinguishing between the headline CPI and what it calls a personal inflation rate.
A personal inflation rate.
Exactly. See, the official statistic is a weighted average based on a hypothetical consumer. It's a basket of goods. But nobody lives their life as a statistical average.
Right, nobody buys exactly the average amount of everything.
Exactly. So if Maya's absolute exposure is concentrated in commercial rent, wholesale flour, and dairy, and those are sectors experiencing acute supply shocks, well, her personal inflation rate is functionally completely detached from the 3.4% national average.
Oh, that makes so much sense. We also have to factor in the psychological friction of disinflation versus deflation.
Yes, this is huge.
Because the news anchors, they celebrate that inflation has dropped from, say, 8% down to 3.4%. But a lower rate of change just means the water is filling the boat slower.
Right.
Doesn't mean the water level's actually dropping. Maya's costs aren't reverting to 2022 levels. They are just compounding at a slightly less terrifying velocity.
Which is such a vital distinction. I mean, deflation might sound great to a consumer at the pastry counter, like, oh, prices are going down, right?
But the book notes why central banks fight deflation tooth and nail. Broad-based deflation actually increases the real burden of debt, and it incentivizes consumers to delay spending. Because you think, well, it'll be cheaper next month, I'll wait.
Precisely. And that can freeze a local economy entirely.
Wow. Okay, so the squeeze Maya's feeling, it doesn't stay confined to her kitchen either. It bleeds directly into the civic infrastructure.
Yeah, this is where the story gets really interesting.
Yeah. So Asha, who is a hospital worker and one of Maya's regulars, she comes into the bakery panicking because her evening transit, Route 6, is getting cut after 7 p.m. And Asha shows Maya this viral social media post claiming the city is slashing the bus budget to fund a $9 million gold fountain in a public plaza.
Which is perfectly engineered to trigger just blinding civic rage. I mean, think about it. Essential workers are stranded in the dark while the city builds a monument to its own vanity.
It's the ultimate rage bait.
Total rage bait.
But Maya actually dives into the 312-page municipal budget to verify it.
Which nobody does.
Right, nobody does that. But she does. And what she finds completely dismantles the viral post. First of all, there is no gold town.
Right.
The $9.2 million is allocated for the Maple Basin Resilience and Civic Square project. It's a massive underground stormwater tank system disguised as a plaza.
Right, and it's designed to stop the exact kind of flooding that nearly wiped out Maya's bakery 2 years ago.
Exactly. And furthermore, the viral post deliberately conflates funding mechanisms to create this false trade-off. It implies the $9.2 million was literally stolen from the bus drivers.
Yeah.
But the ledger reveals that $5 million of that project is a restricted state resilience grant, and another $2.3 million is from a federal mitigation program.
Right. So, assuming the audience here knows the fundamental firewall between a capital budget and an operating budget, the danger is how easily political rhetoric weaponizes the public's ignorance of that firewall.
Explain that firewall a bit more, just in case.
Sure, it's like a household budget. A capital budget is like getting a special loan to buy a house or a new roof. It's a one-time big investment.
Okay.
An operating budget is needing cash every single month to pay the electric bill or buy groceries. You legally cannot take a restricted federal capital grant meant for pouring concrete and use it to cover a structural operating deficit in the transit department. It's just not how the money works.
Wow, okay, so the transit cut is a completely separate crisis.
Completely separate. The agency is bleeding operating funds because of a severe driver shortage. And that's driving up exorbitant overtime costs. They literally do not have the human beings to safely operate Route 6 at 9 p.m.
So the trade-off presented in the viral post, the fountain versus the bus, is a complete fiction.
Total fiction.
So to combat that specific kind of fiction, the author provides a methodology called the 7-step claim check.
Yes.
And the first step alone is just this massive upgrade in how we process digital information. It says, make the claim testable by finding the denominator.
Right, because a viral post claiming, city spending on vanity projects exploded by millions, that is mathematically useless.
Right, millions out of what?
Exactly. You have to force the claim into a verifiable ratio. What is the $9.2 million capital expenditure as a percentage of the total capital budget?
Right.
Or what is it per capita? You need that denominator to understand the scale.
And step 6 of that framework is just as vital. It says, test the causal story. Sequence does not equal proof.
This is a big one.
Yeah. Just because event A, the city breaking ground on a plaza, happened at the exact same time as event B, the city cutting the bus route, it does not mean A caused B. You have to demand the mechanism that connects them.
And in this case, the mechanism didn't exist because the funds were entirely isolated.
Right.
Taking a step back from Maya's bakery, the book scales this problem up to the national level. If a single fabricated post about a stormwater drain can completely derail a community's understanding of its own transit system, how does a massive, diverse society handle systemic, high-stakes disagreements without just fracturing entirely?
Well, the author's solution is a framework for dissecting public arguments into 4 distinct layers. And I honestly found this to be the most clarifying part of the entire book.
Oh, me too.
Yeah, because when we argue over something like a housing crisis or a transit deficit, we're usually having 4 completely different arguments simultaneously without even realizing it.
Exactly. People just talk past each other. So the first layer is the factual claim. This is purely objective. Like, average rent in this city rose 6% last year.
Right. That is either mathematically true or false.
Yes.
Then you move to layer 2, which
Mhm.
is the causal claim. This is where we propose the mechanism behind the fact.
Right. So one side says the rent increase was caused by zoning laws restricting new apartment construction.
Okay.
And the other side says, no, it was caused by corporate landlords using algorithmic price setting.
So you agree on the fact, but argue about the cause.
Exactly. Then the third layer introduces the value claim. And this is where objective data gives way to subjective priority.
Okay, what do you mean?
Well, it's the philosophical debate over whether, say, the stability of a family shelter should legally supersede a property owner's liberty to maximize their return on investment.
Ah, okay. That's deep. And then finally, layer 4 is the policy claim, the actionable recommendation. So based on all that, someone says, we must pass a 3% strict cap on annual rent increases.
Right. And the brilliance of separating these layers is realizing where evidence actually works. Verified data can resolve the first two layers. We can prove if rent went up, and we can track the economic mechanisms of why.
Right, we can look at the math.
But data cannot by itself resolve a value claim. Math cannot tell a society exactly how much liberty it should sacrifice for security or how much economic efficiency it should trade for social equality.
Which means two highly educated, perfectly rational citizens can look at the exact same verified data set and arrive at violently opposed policy conclusions simply because their underlying value stack is prioritized differently.
Understanding that is the key to arguing productively.
But the author draws a very hard line here, which I loved. A difference in values does not give anyone a permission slip to invent alternative facts.
Say it louder for the people in the back.
Right. You cannot fabricate a story about a $9 million gold fountain just because you deeply value public transit. Your values might justify your policy preference, but they never excuse a false factual claim.
And when those value claims inevitably clash on a national scale, we rely on constitutions to manage the fallout. The book defines a healthy democracy not as a society that has magically eliminated conflict, but as one capable of processing conflict without erasing the minority.
Basically, constitutions are mechanisms to control the controllers.
Yeah, they are an admission that good intentions are insufficient. I mean, a 51% majority rule is incredibly powerful. But if that slim majority can instantly alter the rules to silence the 49% or prevent them from organizing or strip their civil liberties, well, then the subsequent election isn't legitimate. We limit the power of leaders and majorities in advance because we acknowledge they will eventually be wrong.
And the ultimate stress test of those constitutional limits isn't a political speech or a campaign promise.
Oh, yeah.
It's the budget.
Oh, absolutely.
The book puts it so bluntly. It says, a budget is a law of priority. A politician can stand at a podium and deliver this soaring, emotional speech about how much they value infrastructure or education.
Oh, we've all seen it.
Right. But if the recurring expenditure isn't explicitly funded in the operating budget, the speech is just empty rhetoric.
The ledger reveals what the government is actually prepared to execute, and the author warns readers to look closely at baselines, too.
What do you mean by baselines?
Well, a politician might brag about increasing a department's budget by $10 million. Sounds great, right?
Sure.
But if population growth and inflation require $15 million just to maintain the current level of service, that quote-unquote increase is functionally a severe cut.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That changes everything when you look at the news. So national budgets and constitutional limits are currently being pushed to their breaking point by forces that completely ignore local jurisdictions and national borders.
Yeah, the big stuff.
Yeah. The book highlights two massive structural challenges testing this operating system: the climate crisis and the digital frontier.
Both of which are textbook examples of externalities scaled to a planetary level.
Okay, define externality for us.
An externality is when decisions made by actors in one transaction impose direct costs on people outside the transaction, people who had zero say in it, like pollution. Decisions made in one hemisphere impose direct costs on populations and future generations all over the globe.
Right. And because climate change is the ultimate cross-border externality, the author argues we have to abandon single-track solutions and adopt a dual portfolio.
Right.
We can't just debate mitigation, reducing emissions, carbon pricing, overhauling energy grids to prevent future warming. We also have to aggressively fund adaptation.
The warming already locked into the system necessitates defensive capital projects. I mean, going back to the story, Maya's Bakery only survived the last storm because the city funded the Maple Basin Stormwater Plaza.
Exactly.
Ignoring adaptation in favor of pure mitigation is a luxury local municipalities literally cannot afford.
So moving from the physical climate to the information climate, the book's analysis of the digital frontier is anchored around the European Union's AI Act, which just hit a critical application milestone just weeks ago on August 2, 2026.
Right, and the urgency around generative AI, it stems from how it fundamentally alters the cost structure of information.
This part blew my mind.
It's terrifying, honestly. Historically, producing highly persuasive, cited, seemingly authoritative propaganda, it required significant human labor and capital. It took effort.
But generative AI drives the cost of producing a convincing lie to basically zero.
Yep, zero.
It generates what the book calls fluent falsehoods. We're talking about perfectly structured essays with synthetic citations or photorealistic video and synthetic audio of a politician declaring something they literally never said.
And our cognitive architecture is highly vulnerable to this because humans conflate fluency with accuracy.
Yeah.
If something is well written or if it's confidently delivered, our brains just naturally process that fluency as evidence of truth.
So to survive an environment where the zero-cost lie is ubiquitous, the book outlines the 4 capabilities of digital citizenship.
Yes.
And rather than just listing them, let's look at how they actually function against an AI-generated hallucination.
Good idea. So the first capability is tracing authority and procedure. When a generative model spits out a summary of a new zoning law, you cannot accept the summary as the terminal source.
Right.
You have to trace the output back to the primary procedural document, the actual legislative text or the city council minutes.
Which takes work.
It does. The second capability leans heavily on what we discussed earlier with the 7-step claim check. Read denominators, dates, and uncertainty.
Oh, because AI models are notorious for stripping away context.
Exactly. If a chatbot tells you crime is up 40%, you have to demand the denominator. 40% of what total? Over what specific time period? And what is the margin of error?
It's like asking the AI for its receipts.
Yes. Then the third capability is resisting premature causal stories. AI excels at massive pattern recognition, but pattern recognition is not causality.
Give an example of that.
Sure. A machine might identify that ice cream sales and shark attacks both spike in July.
Right, they both go up.
Right, but relying on the machine to tell you why without rigorously testing the mechanism leads to disastrous policy assumptions. It might say ice cream causes shark attacks, when really it's just summer. People eat ice cream and people swim in the ocean.
That's a great example.
Yeah.
And the fourth capability brings us full circle to the layers of argument we talked about, stating value differences without inventing facts.
Yes. Generative AI can be prompted to hallucinate data that perfectly supports your specific value claim.
You could just tell it to give you the data you want to hear.
Exactly. So resisting the temptation to deploy a synthetic fact just because it helps your side win a policy debate, that is the core ethical requirement of digital citizenship.
The author's overarching thesis here is profound. They're saying that in an AI-rich society, foundational knowledge of how the operating system works is vastly more important than rote memorization.
Absolutely. You don't need to memorize the exact tax code or historical dates because a machine can retrieve them instantly. What you need is the structural framework to verify the machine's output. You need a path to verification.
You need to know how to read the map so you don't drive off a cliff just because the GPS confidently told you to.
Exactly. And that requires a conceptual tool the book emphasizes in its final chapters, the counterfactual.
Okay, what is the counterfactual?
Well, evaluating the success or failure of any policy, whether it's the central bank's interest rate, the city's transit budget, or the EU AI Act, it requires comparing reality to the counterfactual. You cannot judge a policy merely by looking at the flawed reality it produced. You have to rigorously ask, what would have happened if this policy was never enacted?
Because we fall into this trap of comparing a new law to a flawless utopian ideal. We think, well, it didn't solve everything, so it failed.
Right. But the true metric of success is comparing the flawed reality against the invisible, often catastrophic alternative. If the city didn't build the stormwater plaza, what would the uninsured flood damage have cost the local economy?
Wow, yeah.
If the central bank didn't raise rates, what would Maya's flour cost today?
The counterfactual forces intellectual honesty into the debate. It demands that critics of a policy defend the realistic alternative, rather than just pointing out the imperfections of the current attempt.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
a game changer for how you view the news.
Which perfectly sets up the final provocation I want to leave you with, pulled directly from the book's FAQ section. The author poses this surprisingly intimate question about our political identities. They ask, is changing a political position always dishonest?
Oh, this is such a good part. Because the media landscape has trained us to view any shift in a public figure's stance as a profound moral failing.
Right. We immediately brand them a hypocrite or accuse them of a political flip-flop.
We equate ideological rigidity with trustworthiness, like they never change their minds, so they must be honest.
And the book rejects that entirely. Updating your judgment when presented with new, verifiable evidence isn't a weakness. It is the central, vital skill of adult learning.
Absolutely.
A citizen or a leader who is literally incapable of updating their worldview, they aren't a paragon of integrity. They are just trapped in their own dogma.
It requires immense humility to publicly admit I fiercely believed this causal story, but the macroeconomic data proved my mechanism was wrong, so I am fundamentally updating my policy preference. I mean, a functioning, resilient democracy practically begs its citizens to behave this way.
So here's the challenge to apply this to your own life today. Think about one deeply held political or economic belief you carry right now. One of your core policy claims. Got it. Now ask yourself, exactly what piece of verifiable evidence would it take for you to change your mind?
It is the ultimate diagnostic test for ideological blindness.
What specific data set, what measurable outcome would force you to say, I was wrong and I need to update my position? Because if you genuinely cannot answer that question, if there was literally no evidence in the universe that could ever make you alter your stance, then you aren't actually reading the map. You are just staring blankly at the wall. We'll see you next time.